My friend and brother, Jeremiah Johnston, Dr. Jeremiah Johnston, and we're going to talk about the top 10 biblical archaeological discoveries of all time.
All right, let's see it.
Biblical archaeological discovery of all time.
Of all time.
Is
the Jesus Cup.
What is that?
I had just moved to Oxford with my wife and our baby girl, and I started hearing in 2009 about this fascinating discovery. And it says this in Greek on the cup. And by the way, what's the cup dated to? According to Mr. Gaudio himself, 50 AD. Listen to this. It says, Ho goestes die Christou. Through Christ, the magician, the enchanter.
So this cup doesn't actually have anything whatsoever to do with Jesus at all. The word there is not Christ as a reference to Jesus. That's spelled with an iota, and the word on this cup is spelled with an eta, which means it is an adjective that means something like the good. Additionally, 50 CE is a bit early for Jesus' reputation to have traveled to Alexandria and to have proliferated there. That's something that would have happened within the 50s. Now, two other aspects of Dr. Johnston's presentation here jumped out at me. The first was his reference to moving to Oxford in 2009. That was when I was attending the University of Oxford. So I tried to look up what college he was in and what he was studying, and it turns out he was not studying at the University of Oxford. He was doing research connected with an entirely different university in the city of Oxford. But when I looked him up, I saw that he likes to make references to being in Oxford, but never clarifies that he was not attending the University of Oxford. He never explains that he was actually attending an entirely different university at the time. And more than once in this video, he's going to make reference to being in Oxford, which strikes me as a misrepresentation. The second thing that jumped out at me was how bad Dr. Johnston's Greek is. In addition to wildly mispronouncing that first word, hogistes, he translated the text differently from how he read it, putting the magician at the end and putting it in apposition to the name Christ. But that tells me Dr. Johnston doesn't understand Greek very well, because hogistes is a dative plural noun, and via Christou would be a singular genitive noun, and you can't have something in apposition in a different case. Additionally, hogistes is plural, it's not singular, like via Christou would be. So this is not a reference to Christ, and Dr. Johnston has wildly misunderstood and misrepresented the Greek, and is also misrepresenting his academic background, so I am very wary about the presentation that we're going to get in this video.
This one is very recent, Alan. This is the curse tablet. Have you heard of this?
So pretty much no scholars take seriously the claims of these apologists regarding this curse tablet. And I discussed the recent publication in my video number McClellan 1364, but this discovery was announced and published well outside standard academic protocols and norms, because the goal was just to gin up attention and get out ahead of scholarly scrutiny so that they could then turn around and say the scholars are all biased. But nobody takes this seriously. It's absolutely not what it claims to be. So this is a scan from the publication, which is the interior of this folded up curse tablet, and all the cracks and bumps and everything you see in it, they are claiming are letters. Specifically, they are these letters, and philologists and epigraphers and archaeologists are just baffled at the notion that these letters are being identified from that scan. But there's more. A scholar named Christopher W. Jones has helpfully pointed out that the reading being asserted in print requires that this text be read in this direction, starting in the lower left with the yellow A equals 1, and then following all the way until you see the end of the arrow toward the bottom middle of the tablet. This is pure and utter nonsense.
And I'm going to say number 8 is P52, the John Rylands fragment. This fragment is so interesting because it was circulating the same time, Alan, that the original Gospel of John, I'm talking the one John wrote, was also circulating. We date, as Bible scholars, John's Gospel to the 90s AD. How do we date fragments? How do we date manuscripts? This is what I did in my doctoral work in Oxford. You date it by the science of paleography.
So while this fragment doesn't really do much to prove Christianity is true, and while Dr. Johnston is leaning very heavily into the earliest possible dating of the fragment, this is a legitimate artifact and a very important one.
What's this one?
Alan, this one's graffiti. The Palatine graffito is huge. It's remarkable. This is actually a graffiti. This was incised in one of the 7 hills, the Palatine Hill in Rome. Why is the Palatine graffito important? Well, this is the earliest depiction, the earliest illustration that we have of crucifixion from all antiquity. It's dated to the 1st or 2nd century. It was just discovered in 1857.
The Alexamenos graffito is a very important artifact, and it is being flatly misrepresented here. It does not date to the 1st or 2nd century CE. It dates to around 200 CE, the very beginning of the 3rd century CE. It is also not the earliest depiction of crucifixion. The Alchemilla graffito from Puteoli is the earliest depiction of crucifixion. That is not a Christian graffito in any way, shape, or form, but it dates to probably around 65 to 75 years earlier than the Alexamenos graffito. And here is what the Alchemilla graffito from Puteoli looks like, by the way.
6 is the crucified heel bone of poor old Yehohanan.
This is also a totally legitimate and very important artifact that points to the historicity of crucifixion in 1st century Rome and the plausibility of the narrative regarding Jesus' execution by the state.
The central event in Christianity is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, so I'm going to go with the ossuaries. This is the James ossuary. This is controversial. I think it's the top 5 for sure. This is the very ossuary of James, the brother of the Lord. You can see that incised in some of that writing on the side of the bone box, which is an ossuary.
So it has his name?
Has his name right in the middle, James, the brother of Jesus.
Oh, wow.
So James is not in the middle. The name is Yaakov, Jacob, and it's the very first thing in the inscription. But I would agree with those many scholars who argue that this inscription, at least in part, likely the second part of it, the brother of Jesus part of it, is a modern forgery.
The 4th one has got to be the Pilatos stone, the stone of Pontius Pilate.
This is another totally legitimate and very important artifact that points to the historicity of Pilate's role in Rome's governance of Judea.
So, Alan, the 3rd most important discovery of all time has to be the Nazareth inscription. This is fascinating. This is written in Greek. It's a marble stone tablet. It's an edict of one of the Caesars threatening violence, persecution, prosecution to anyone who dares rob corpses out of graves or tombs. So it's...
Why would that be?
So this is an unprovenanced artifact, meaning it was not discovered by archaeologists and it was not discovered within its original material context. It was purchased by a collector at a market in Nazareth. Nazareth is not mentioned anywhere in the inscription, and absolutely nothing indicates it has anything whatsoever to do with Nazareth. People just assume, well, this might be a response to Jesus' body having left the tomb somehow. Analyses were recently conducted on the stone that were able to identify where the stone was quarried, and it was quarried on the Greek island of Kos. Interestingly enough, at the end of the 1st century BCE, there was a famous tomb desecration of a ruler named Nicias, a tyrant who lived on Kos. And so scholars are very confident that this was commissioned by Caesar Augustus in the second half of the 1st century BCE in response to the desecration of the tomb of the tyrant of Kos named Nicias. It has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with Jesus.